Imagine traveling through one of the driest regions of northern China. There are grasslands, wind turbines, mining operations, and for decades, there was very little reason to think this place would become important to the future of artificial intelligence. But today, something extraordinary is happening here. Across Ulaanqab, in China's Inner Mongolia, nearly 100 data centers have already opened or entered construction. And companies have now announced or committed to projects representing roughly 12.5 gigawatts of computing capacity. That's more than the eventual capacity targeted by OpenAI's massive Stargate project. But here's what makes this story even stranger. China isn't simply building another giant data center. It is building an entire ecosystem where electricity, renewable energy, cooling, computer chips, and artificial intelligence are being brought together in one remote region. And one of the world's most important AI companies may soon be part of it. DeepSeek. So why is China building AI infrastructure in a place that looks more like a giant piece of wilderness than the future capital of artificial intelligence? And what happens when one of the world's driest regions becomes home to some of the world's most power-hungry machines? That's the story of Ulanqab. 1. Sits in Inner Mongolia, roughly 2 hours west of Beijing by high-speed train. The region is famous for grasslands, livestock, mining, and enormous open landscapes. But its geography hides something extremely valuable: energy. Inner Mongolia has enormous wind and solar resources. It also has a relatively cool climate compared with many major Chinese cities. And that combination is extremely attractive to data center operators. Because artificial intelligence doesn't just need computers, it needs electricity. And lots of it. A modern AI facility can contain thousands, and eventually hundreds of thousands, of specialized processors. Every processor consumes electricity, every server generates heat, and every one of those machines needs to operate inside a tightly controlled environment. That means the cost of running an AI system isn't just about buying the chips. It is also about finding somewhere with enough electricity, enough land, enough cooling capacity, and enough infrastructure to keep those chips running around the clock. Ulanqab happens to offer several of those ingredients at the same time. And China has been deliberately moving computing infrastructure toward regions where electricity is more abundant. The strategy is sometimes described as Eastern data, Western compute. The idea is relatively simple. China's largest population centers generate enormous amounts of digital demand. But the cheapest and most abundant energy resources aren't always located there. So instead of putting every giant computing facility next to Beijing or Shanghai, China can move some of that computing workload toward energy-rich regions. Ulanqab is becoming one of the biggest examples of that strategy. 2. The number that changes the story. Here's where the scale becomes difficult to understand. According to recent reporting, companies have announced or committed to data center projects in Ulanqab, representing approximately 12.5 gigawatts of capacity. And more than 70% of those commitments were announced within roughly the last year. That means this isn't simply an old data center cluster slowly expanding. The expansion is accelerating. For comparison, OpenAI's Stargate project has been targeting around 10 gigawatts of total capacity when fully built. Ulanqab's figure is therefore enormous. But we need to be precise. The 12.5 gigawatts isn't one giant building. It represents the combined capacity of multiple projects across the region, including facilities that are operating, under construction, or planned. And that's actually more interesting, because it means we're not looking at one megaproject. We're looking at an entire computing ecosystem forming around one location. 3. The giant building already here. And now we have something concrete to look at. In August 2026, Chinese technology and renewable energy company Envision officially commissioned its Galaxy campus in Ulanqab. At the heart of the project is a 120,000 square meter AI computing facility. That's roughly the size of 20 standard football pitches. The facility is designed to scale beyond 2 gigawatts of capacity, and Envision says it can support up to around 1 million AI chips operating in parallel. Think about that for a moment. Not 1 million computers, not 1 million laptops. We're talking about an infrastructure environment designed around approximately 1 million AI processors, and the building is only one part of the system. Envision is connecting the computing facility directly with renewable energy infrastructure. The campus is backed by around 2 gigawatts of renewable energy capacity, including wind power. This is a major shift in how AI infrastructure is being designed. Instead of thinking about the data center as a building that consumes electricity, China is increasingly trying to design the power system and the computing system together. 4. Why put AI in the middle of nowhere? At first, the location seems completely wrong. Why not build this near Beijing? Why not Shanghai? Why move billions of dollars of computing infrastructure into Inner Mongolia? The answer comes down to 3 things: power, climate, and land. Electricity is one of the biggest operating costs for a massive data center. And Ulaanqab has access to relatively inexpensive electricity supported by abundant energy resources. Alibaba Cloud's local AI data center management has even estimated that for data centers of the same scale, operating in Ulaanqab can save billions of yuan annually compared with other locations. Then there's the climate. Data centers generate enormous amounts of heat. The colder the surrounding environment, the easier it can be to manage some of that thermal load. Ulanqab's relatively cool climate therefore becomes an advantage. And then there's land. A traditional office building needs floors. An AI computing campus needs land, substations, power equipment, cooling systems, warehouses, transmission infrastructure, and enormous industrial buildings. Building that inside one of China's most expensive urban areas would be extremely difficult. Here, there is space. A lot of it. And this is where Ulanqab's importance becomes even more interesting. DeepSeek. The Chinese AI company became globally famous after demonstrating that powerful AI models could potentially be developed with dramatically different approaches to computing efficiency. Now, reports indicate that DeepSeek has been considering roughly 1 gigawatt of AI data center capacity in Ulaanqab. But this needs an important qualification. This isn't a confirmed operational 1 gigawatt DeepSeek campus. Reports say DeepSeek has been discussing potential cooperation with local authorities, while China Daily reported that the two sides had not committed to such a project. DeepSeek is currently using computing capacity leased from local providers. If that project eventually moves forward, however, it would tell us something important. Chinese AI companies aren't only competing through algorithms anymore. They're competing for physical computing infrastructure. Because the AI race is increasingly becoming a race for access to machines. 6. The real AI battle isn't in the cloud. For years, artificial intelligence sounded almost completely digital. We talked about algorithms, models, chatbots, training data. But every AI model eventually meets the same physical reality. It needs processors. Processors need servers. Servers need networking. Networking needs buildings. Buildings need cooling. Cooling needs energy. And all of it needs electricity. This is why the AI boom is starting to look less like the software industry, and more like an industrial revolution. The companies that control enough computing capacity can train larger models. They can serve more users. They can run more experiments. And they can potentially deploy AI systems at a scale their competitors cannot match. So when China builds an enormous computing cluster in Inner Mongolia, it's not simply constructing warehouses full of servers. It's building strategic infrastructure. 7. Turning wind into artificial intelligence. And this may be the most fascinating part of Ulanqab. The region has enormous wind resources. For years, renewable energy development has expanded across Inner Mongolia. But renewable electricity can sometimes be produced in places far away from the largest population centers. That creates a challenge. How do you use all that energy efficiently? One answer is to bring a huge electricity consumer directly into the region: AI. Instead of generating electricity in Inner Mongolia and sending all of it hundreds of kilometers toward distant cities, China can use part of that electricity locally to run massive computing facilities. That's exactly the kind of relationship Beijing increasingly wants between renewable energy and computing infrastructure. Recent analysis has described China's strategy as an attempt to connect data centers more closely with the electricity system and use computing demand to absorb renewable energy output. And Envision is taking this concept even further. Its Ulaanqab campus is designed around the combination of renewable energy, power management, and high-density AI computing. The company has also announced a broader goal of building 5 gigawatts of green AI computing capacity in desert and arid regions worldwide by 2030. So Ulanqab may not be the end of the experiment. It could be the prototype. 8. But there's a problem. There is one major contradiction in this story. Ulanqab has abundant energy. It has huge amounts of land. It has a cool climate. But it is also a relatively dry region, and AI data centers need cooling. Some modern facilities use advanced air cooling or closed-loop systems, while others can rely on water-based cooling depending on their design and operating conditions. But when dozens of enormous computing facilities appear in an already water-stressed region, water becomes a serious question. And this is where the AI boom becomes much more complicated, because you can solve one infrastructure problem by moving to a remote region, only to create another. Recent reporting on Ulanqab has highlighted concerns over water availability as the data center industry expands. The question isn't simply, can China build the computers? It is, can China provide the electricity, cooling, water, and infrastructure required to keep them running? 9. The city is changing around the servers, and the transformation is already visible. Ulanqab has attracted dozens of data center projects. Major technology companies have established infrastructure there. Electricity consumption from internet data services has surged dramatically. According to local statistics cited by Cation, electricity consumption from internet data services in Ulanqab rose 85.2% year-over-year during the first half of 2026, reaching roughly 4 billion kilowatt-hours. That's what happens when computing stops being an abstract digital service and becomes an industrial sector. The landscape changes, power infrastructure expands, construction accelerates, data center campuses appear, transmission systems grow, and an entire supply chain begins forming around the machines. The servers are becoming the new factories. 10. China's bigger bet. But there is an even bigger question hiding behind all of this. What happens if AI demand doesn't slow down? If AI models continue getting larger, if businesses integrate AI into everyday operations, if autonomous systems become widespread, and if billions of people eventually use AI services every day, then the world may need dramatically more computing infrastructure than it has today. China is positioning Ulanqab for exactly that possibility. The government isn't simply watching the AI industry grow. It is building the physical foundations underneath it, and that's why the number 12.5 gigawatts matters. Not because every single megawatt is guaranteed to be built tomorrow, but because it shows the scale of the bet. China is preparing for a future in which computing becomes one of the world's largest industrial demands. 11. The new industrial revolution. Think about what powered previous industrial revolutions. First came coal, then oil, then electricity. Now we're entering an age where computation itself is becoming a strategic resource. 12. The future of AI may look very different. A decade ago, if someone told you that one of the most important AI hubs in the world would emerge in the middle of Inner Mongolia, it would have sounded strange. Today, it makes perfect sense. Because the future of AI doesn't just need brilliant engineers. It needs energy. It needs land. It needs chips. It needs cooling. It needs networks. And above everything, it needs enormous amounts of physical infrastructure. Ulanqab is becoming one of the places where all of those pieces are coming together. The region has already attracted nearly 100 data center projects. A 120,000 square meter AI facility has entered operation. Envision is connecting gigawatt-scale computing with renewable power. DeepSeek is reportedly exploring additional capacity. And across the wider region, Announced and committed projects now represent roughly 12.5 gigawatts. But the final outcome isn't guaranteed. Some projects will be delayed, some may change, some may never reach their planned capacity. And the economics of AI could change dramatically over the next decade. But one thing is already clear. The AI race is no longer happening only on computer screens. It is happening in the real world. With cranes, power lines, wind turbines, transformers, gigantic buildings, and millions of processors. So the next time someone tells you that AI lives in the cloud, remember Ulaanqab, because underneath that cloud is something much more physical: steel, electricity, concrete, and machines, millions of them. And if China's 12.5 gigawatt bet reaches its full potential, this remote corner of Inner Mongolia could become one of the world's most important factories for artificial intelligence. The AI revolution may look digital on the screen, but it is being built on the ground, and Ulanqab may be one of the places where that future begins.